Welcome, listeners. Today on Don't Believe Those Stories, I have a story that takes place in the summer of 1997. It starts on a Saturday evening when my husband, myself, and my son went to visit my parents as my dad was about to go on a 3-week vacation to Jamaica to visit his family. When we got to my parents' home, we started to chat, as families normally do. But on this particular occasion, we got into a deep discussion about my grandmother, who was 91 years old at the time. We talked about her being older and wanting to ensure that we had some memories about her before she passed on. As such, we talked about him bringing back any little mementos or keepsakes to remember her by. Not that we wanted anything to happen to her, but as she was getting older, we just wanted to make sure we had something to remember her by fondly. At that time in my life, I was in the mode of giving and receiving, believing that if you gave to others from the goodness of your heart, you would receive in return. So being of that spirit at the time, I gave my dad $100. Yes, I know that's not a lot of money these days, but I gave my dad $100 and asked him to give this to someone who he felt was in need of it. My dad did not want to take the money initially because I had a young family and he felt I should keep the money as I needed it. But I said to him that I think someone will need this money much more than I do at this time. So I convinced him, just take the money and give it to someone who he felt would really need it. He eventually said he would take the money, and he decided that he would give half the money to his church in Ocho Rios, and he would give the other half to his mother's church in Westmoreland. I may have had some ideas as to who I would want to give that money to, but I decided that it was not going to be my decision. It would be his decision. So yes, if he felt that he wanted to give the money to the two churches, then that was good with me. We then gathered around the kitchen table and continued to speak further about getting mementos from my grandmother. For example, there was a cake that she always used to bake, and I asked him to bring back her recipe. I also asked him to get details about her life. Also, as she was up in age, I asked my dad to ask his mother about how one would deal with death and the fear of dying. Thinking back on asking about death may not have been the best question to ask, but I felt compelled to ask this question. Looking at my dad's face, I knew he was not going to ask the question. So I wrote a letter to my grandmother. I gave my dad the one and only letter I ever wrote to my grandmother, and asked my dad to give her the letter and make sure he gets a response. I must say that at this point, my family was thinking I might have been crazy, and were wondering why there seemed to be such a sense of urgency with my request, but they continued to indulge me. Now skipping ahead, I want you to know that my dad did bring back the recipe and other mementos from my grandmother. He also got some details about her life. My grandmother overcame a lot of obstacles in her life and became stronger as a result. She also answered my letter about how to deal with death and the fear of dying. Since she was a Christian woman, I was not surprised by her answer, which was, trust in the Lord. So now my dad left for Jamaica shortly after our visit and came back 3 weeks later. I did not see my dad as soon as he got back from Jamaica, but a few days after, I had an experience that I remember to this day. On this particular day, my husband and son were sleeping upstairs, and I was sitting in the living room of my home. All of a sudden, an intense level of fear came over me. I have never felt this level of fear before or since. I could not understand where this fear came from. I felt as if I was going to die that night. I was also feeling brushes against my wrist and my neck. The sensation of having something brushed against my wrist and neck started lightly, but kept on getting stronger. You could say my fear was both emotional and physical. Given this level of fear, I checked all the windows in the house and doors and made sure everything was locked before I going to bed that night. I also prayed that I would wake up the next morning, as I feared it was going to be my last night on earth. Suffice it to say, I was relieved when I woke up the next morning. My fear was not there anymore, and I did not feel the brushes against my wrist and neck anymore. I thought everything was going okay and just chalked it up to my mind and body working against me. However, about an hour or two later in the morning, I got a call from my mom saying that my grandmother was murdered last night. I was shocked. Murdered? How? Why? My mother said that she did not have any details, but asked us to come over. As I was going to the house, I thought of the strange feelings and sensations that I was having the night before. Could it have been linked? Stranger things have happened before. So when we reached my parents' home, I saw that there were other family members at the house, and they were all consoling each other. At some point, I asked if there was something that happened to her wrist and neck, given the sensations I was having, and I was told that her wrists were bound behind her back and her neck was slit. At that moment, it dawned on me that I may have been experiencing what my grandmother was experiencing that night. I don't know how, and I'm not 100% sure why, but I believe I was experiencing her terror. So as a few days went on, my grandmother was buried, and many people from the community came to her funeral. That is in addition to the family. I would like you to know that the men who committed this heinous crime were caught. Actually, the leader of the crime turned himself in, and his accomplices were also caught. And it does appear that the men who killed her were killed in prison. Now, a few months after my grandmother's burial, my dad asked me if I knew this was going to happen. The reason being is because I had given him the $100 to give to someone who needs it, and he decided to give half to his mother's church. He ended up spending more time with his mom than he would normally have spent with her as a result of this. He also said that they did things together that they had not done in over 25 years due to the extra time he was with her. Also, since a tragedy happened shortly after he got back from Jamaica, he felt as if he had said goodbye to his mom. I said that I did not know this was going to happen, but I was very happy that my dad had felt that even in this terrible tragedy, that he was able to say goodbye to his mom. Some may not consider this, but I felt that this is a blessing, that this was not an unsolved murder. The culprits were caught and justice was served. And although I would not want to experience this level of fear that I felt that night again, I felt as if I was there with my grandmother. Also, I believe that as per her response to my letter on how to deal with death and the fear of dying, I believe she trusted the Lord in her final moments. Well, thank you, listeners, for listening to Don't Believe Those Stories. Thank you.